And I just wanted to let it pass, both because of your expertise and experience that both of you have, to not ask you briefly about ongoing events with Venezuela, which is part of the world that we haven't really talked a lot about in the last 20 years. And at first, I think one of the things we perhaps need to spend more time on is explaining why we should care. And I think one of the issues is what we had discussed in my first round of questions, these autocracy versus democracy debate. But this is in our own hemisphere, becoming even more pronounced in that. And the other is it's in our national interest. I mean, if things in Venezuela do not improve, the migratory crisis, another 2 to 3 million people are projected to leave, which would potentially collapse social services in Colombia, but also Peru, Ecuador, even Brazil. So it becomes a regional disaster. The drug flights sponsored by their government, these planes are literally flying out of their airspace, protected by their armed services. They turn right into Central America. They land in Guatemala or Honduras. They're trafficked into the U.S. It's a fuel for the gangs that are terrorizing people and causing migration from that part of the world, not to mention the drugs headed to us. They harbor terrorist groups openly. The ELN, as an example, just killed 20 police cadets about a month ago in Colombia, openly harbored in Venezuelan territory. And something that hasn't been covered, the environmental destruction that is occurring in the gold mining, just absolute catastrophic degradation of once pristine areas. So a couple observations, because I want your insight, given your years of experience. The first is, and all this talk about multilateralism, in many ways, the administration's approach to this has been sort of the model of that. The OAS, the Lima Group, virtually all the EU countries. In fact, the EU would be there if it wasn't for Italy and I believe Greece that are refusing to come on board, but everybody else is there. 60 countries sort of aligned with this position and the like. And then the assessment I have is that this is a regime core made up of cronies who are isolated from reality and a lot of other people. A lot of yes men around them when you're in that level of power, but they are able to provide incentives to the security forces. By the way, are multi-layered down to street gangs that they're using to protect them. But they're still able to provide incentives to the security forces to protect them and to spy on each other. And hence, I think the policy approach has been to target those incentives that they're able to provide by going after the hard currencies through the sale of oil, none of which benefited the Venezuelan people. And of course, the diplomatic isolation as well. But what strikes me is this has been going now, the crisis has been going on for a long time, but from the moment the interim president swore in to today, it's been 4 weeks and a couple days. So it hasn't been 4 years or 4 months, 4 weeks. And everybody wants to know, why isn't it over yet? First of all, your observation of the general situation, and second, the value of some level of strategic patience. These sanctions and this pressure, both the international isolation and the economic, take time to build in before you begin to see the security forces and elites that are supporting them crack. It doesn't happen from one day to the next, and sometimes they're unpredictable. They happen very quickly, and embedded in that, too, is the notion that we do want to see some of the institutions there, as flawed as they may be, survive, because if the police officers don't show up the next day, there's no security, and then it gets really bad. So just your general observations on both how long it takes to do this, the strategic patience part of it, and anything else with regards to it.
Sure. Well, 3 quick comments, Senator. First, I absolutely agree with you on what's at stake. You know, through administrations of both parties, we've tended not to pay as consistent a strategic attention to our own hemisphere as we should have. And you're right about the spillover dangers, too, for Colombia, a success story in the last 20 years, but which could really be badly affected by this. Second, I think in terms of approach, you're right. I think the reliance on multilateralism, on diplomacy, on working with partners in the hemisphere as well as Europe is exactly the right approach. Strategic patience is I think, the right frame for thinking about this. It takes time for that kind of pressure to take effect. I think there's, as you know better than I do, there's all sorts of challenges which would arise in terms of military intervention, given the history of our involvement in the hemisphere and the baggage that comes with that. So I think it's the right approach to build up that kind of pressure. And then the only last comment I'd make is that I hope we're being very careful about, in a sense, preparing for success, because the day after can bring huge challenges, just as you suggested in Venezuela. If you end up in a situation where all the institutions are broken and you've got lots of people who have an incentive to breed further insecurity, it's a huge challenge as well. So a lot of attention needs to be put into that.
2 quick points. Agree with you, need patience. Agree it should be multilateral. The problem is I don't see that we've got enough leverage to get Maduro gone. And I think where the committee can focus and where I hope Elliott Abrams is focusing is what is a strategy that gets us more leverage that will actually crack this regime. Secondly, on Bill's point, one of the things John Allen said, you know, when you plan a major intervention that is going to perhaps crater or change a regime, you need to start with phase 4 and work backwards. What do you want the situation to be after you've succeeded? And then work backwards in your planning. So the things you do now to achieve that result are not working at cross purposes with where you end up. I don't think we've done that kind of deliberative planning with respect to Venezuela, given how it came up. I think we need to start it now.